It was a lovely June day in 1845. The sun was shining in a bright blue sky. Not a cloud in sight. It was the perfect afternoon to head down to the river and watch a clown being pulled along in a wooden washtub by 4 geese. Before long, the riverbank was alive with spectators. People arrived early. Children squeezed between the adults, while others searched for somewhere just a little higher. As unusual as it might sound today, it was, by all accounts, an excellent way to spend an afternoon. An afternoon that would end in the greatest tragedy Great Yarmouth had ever known. Travelling Victorian circuses relied on spectacular publicity to announce their arrival in a new town. The owners of Cook's Royal Circus wanted a promotion unlike anything people had seen before. They turned to one of their clowns, Arthur Nelson, and challenged him to come up with something that would stop people in their tracks. Then Arthur remembered one of the strangest performances he'd ever seen, an act by the theatrical showman Richard Dicky Usher. It involved a wooden washtub, 4 geese, and one very willing clown. Children have always loved clowns. Arthur Nelson knew that, and he knew exactly how to turn their fascination into an unforgettable performance. By May 1845, Cook's Royal Circus was preparing to arrive in Great Yarmouth, and Arthur set about getting his unusual new act ready. Advertising bills began appearing across the town. Brightly coloured illustrations promised music, horses, acrobats, and a clown who would be pulled along the river by 4 geese in a wooden washtub. Word spread quickly from neighbour to neighbour, and before long both adults and children were eagerly awaiting the circus's arrival. Louisa Utting and her sisters Sarah and Caroline were counting down the days. Neither she nor anyone else could have imagined that within a week her name would become forever linked with one of Britain's most significant legal cases. By the morning of the 2nd of June 1845, the wait was finally over. Arthur's river performance wasn't hidden behind the circus tent or reserved for paying customers. It was free for anyone willing to find a place along the River Bure. Louisa lived with her family in Row 33, one of Great Yarmouth's famously narrow, densely packed working-class alleyways. For children growing up in the Rows, opportunities for entertainment were few and far between. A free circus performance on the river was the sort of excitement they simply could not afford to miss. Some found a place along the riverbank, others leaned from quaysides or crowded onto moored boats. But one place offered a better view than anywhere else, the suspension bridge spanning the River Bure. Completed only a few years earlier, the elegant suspension bridge had quickly become a familiar part of daily life in Great Yarmouth. On most days, it simply carried pedestrians and traffic across the river. On this particular afternoon, it promised something else entirely, the perfect view of Arthur Nelson's extraordinary procession. As the afternoon wore on, more and more people stepped onto the bridge. Children squeezed between the railings for a better look. Parents lifted youngsters onto their shoulders. Nobody thought twice about how many people were gathering. Why would they? It was simply a free afternoon's entertainment. Soon the air buzzed with excited chatter. Children argued over how 4 geese could possibly pull a clown in a wooden washtub, each convinced they knew exactly how it would work. The only thing they all agreed on was that they couldn't wait to see it. Then, at last, Arthur Nelson appeared. Dressed in his clown's costume, he climbed into the wooden washtub as 4 geese were harnessed in front of him. A ripple of laughter and applause spread along the riverbank as the unusual procession prepared to set off. To those seeing it for the first time, it looked extraordinary. 4 geese appeared to be towing a full-grown man down the River Bure. In reality, the birds were doing little more than paddling along for the ride. Hidden well ahead of Arthur was a small rowing boat crewed by circus staff. Beneath the murky waters of the River Bure, A long rope connected the boat to his wooden washtub, invisible to everyone watching from the riverbanks and the suspension bridge. Between them swam 4 real geese, named White, Grey, Turnip and Cabbage, and they were lightly harnessed to the tub. As the unseen boat quietly towed the washtub downstream, the geese naturally paddled ahead, giving the perfect illusion that 4 ordinary birds were pulling a grown man down the river. Children cheered and pointed. Adults laughed just as loudly. More people pressed forward for a better view, while others squeezed onto the suspension bridge, eager not to miss a moment of this spectacle. And there was no better spectacle that day than 4 geese pulling a clown along the River Bure in a wooden washtub. With every passing minute, the bridge grew more and more crowded. The gentle movement beneath people's feet went largely unnoticed. After all, it was exactly where anyone would have chosen to stand that afternoon. Few gave much thought to the bridge itself. Built in 1829, it had been designed to carry pedestrians high above the River Bure, while allowing sailing vessels to pass beneath. On an ordinary day, it handled a steady stream of local people crossing from one side of the river to the other. On this particular afternoon, however, it was supporting far more people than anyone had ever imagined. Children laughed and pointed towards Arthur's unlikely team of geese, while adults smiled and strained for a better view. The river echoed with applause, conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter. It was exactly the sort of harmless spectacle everyone had come to enjoy. As Arthur Nelson and his geese came nearer, the crowd surged towards the railings. Children craned their necks for a better look, while those towards the back pressed against the people in front, determined not to miss the spectacle. Then, somewhere above the laughter and excited chatter, came a deep groaning sound. A moment later, there was a sharp crack. Heads turned. A few people glanced upwards, unsure where the noise had come from. Others barely reacted at all. Arthur was still making his way down the river, and most eyes remained fixed on the performance. Although few realised it at the time, one of the bridge's iron suspension bars, or eye-bars, had just fractured. The bridge remained standing, but it was now relying on the remaining ironwork to carry the weight of hundreds of people. For several minutes the afternoon carried on as though nothing had happened. Conversations resumed, laughter drifted across the river, and Arthur's extraordinary performance remained the centre of everyone's attention. Louisa laughed as the geese paddled along, happily dragging Arthur under the bridge. Everyone rushed to the other side and leaned over, trying to see Arthur come out the other side. Then, without warning, the remaining iron bar gave way. The wooden roadway instantly lost its support on one side, and it flipped completely sideways, turning almost vertical before breaking apart altogether. Hundreds of men, women and children were hurled into the River Bure as timber, chains and shattered planks crashed down around them. The river below was no shallow crossing. It was deep enough for trading vessels and coastal sailing ships to pass beneath the bridge, and in an instant it became a deadly trap. For a few stunned seconds there was silence. Then came the screams. People fought desperately to stay above the surface as sections of the bridge crashed into the water around them. Many of those thrown into the water couldn't swim. Others were dragged under by the collapsing ironwork and tangled wreckage, or crushed against the railings by those falling on top of them. Parents called out the names of their children. Children cried for mothers and fathers they could no longer see. Those who had escaped the collapse could only watch in horror from the riverbanks as the disaster unfolded before them. The River Bure became a scene of desperate rescue. Boatmen pulled hard on their oars towards the wreckage, while others threw ropes or reached out from the quayside, trying to drag survivors from the water before they disappeared beneath the surface. Within minutes, survivors were being pulled from the river, soaked, bleeding and badly shaken. Some clung to pieces of broken timber. Others were carried ashore unconscious and then laid out on the quayside while desperate attempts were made to revive them. As the rescue continued, a terrible realization began to spread through the growing crowds. Not everyone had been accounted for. Parents searched frantically for missing children, calling their names over and over again. Along the riverbank, families who had arrived together only minutes earlier now found themselves desperately searching for one another. More help soon began arriving from the town. The dead and injured were carried into 3 nearby public houses: the Norwich Arms, the Admiral Collingwood, and the Swan Inn, while others were taken into private homes and cared for until their relatives could be found. The Union House Hotel provided blankets, and a local brewery supplied hot water to warm survivors suffering from the cold and early stages of hypothermia. Along the riverfront, ordinary buildings were transformed into makeshift hospitals and mortuaries, as townspeople did whatever they could for those being brought ashore. Only when the rescue efforts finally began to slow did the true scale of the tragedy become clear. By the end of the day, 79 people had lost their lives. 59 of them were children, including Louisa and her sisters. More than 100 others had been injured, many of them seriously. What had begun as a carefree afternoon of entertainment had become one of the worst peacetime disasters Great Yarmouth had ever experienced. Across the town, families were suddenly faced with the unimaginable task of identifying loved ones who had left home expecting nothing more than a free circus performance. As the town mourned its dead, attention turned to a question that demanded an answer. How could a bridge that thousands of people trusted every day have failed so catastrophically? A coroner's inquest was convened the very next day, with one victim representing them all. The body chosen for the principal inquest was that of young Louisa Utting. Rather than holding separate proceedings for every victim, the court used her case to determine exactly why the bridge had collapsed. After hearing the engineering evidence, the jury concluded that Louisa's death had been caused by a defective joint in the first iron eye bar to fail, confirming that the disaster was the result of catastrophic structural failure rather than any wrongdoing by the circus. For Louisa's family, the verdict brought little comfort. Living in one of Great Yarmouth's poorest rows, they could not afford a private funeral. Like many of the other child victims, she was laid to rest with the help of relief funds raised in the aftermath of the disaster. Meanwhile, the government commissioned an independent investigation led by the respected engineer James Walker. Attention soon turned to the bridge's designer, architect Joseph John Scholes. Although he had drawn up the original plans and specified that the suspension eye bars should be made from high-quality iron, his involvement ended there. The bridge was constructed by local contractors. The critical eye bars were forged by a local blacksmith. And, remarkably, Scholes did not inspect the completed structure until the day it officially opened. Investigators also uncovered another important detail. During construction, the bridge's span had been increased from 63 feet to 86 feet, yet the supporting towers were left at their original height. Later, after the main road from Acle to Great Yarmouth was diverted across the bridge, its deck was widened by almost 5 feet. Much of that additional width was added to just one side, placing extra strain on a single suspension chain. James Walker's investigation concluded that the disaster could not be blamed on the crowd alone. Poor quality iron, defective welding, and alterations made after the original design had all combined to create a bridge that was far weaker than anyone realised. The conclusion was clear. The extraordinary crowd that gathered to watch Arthur Nelson's performance had not created the disaster. It had merely exposed flaws that had been there all along. Arthur Nelson survived the collapse completely unharmed. While the bridge fell behind him, he remained afloat on the River Bure, powerless to help as the disaster unfolded before his eyes. He never performed the goose-drawn washtub act again. The illusion that had brought laughter to Victorian crowds became forever associated with one of Britain's worst bridge disasters. Although Nelson continued to enjoy a successful career on the stage, the performance that had made him famous was quietly retired. For Louisa Utting, there would be no second act. Today, the Great Yarmouth Suspension Bridge disaster is largely forgotten outside Norfolk, but in Great Yarmouth itself, the victims have never been allowed to disappear from memory. In 2013, a memorial was unveiled close to the site of the original bridge, bearing the names of those who lost their lives. A blue plaque at the Swan Inn also commemorates the disaster and those caught up in it. On the 2nd of June 1845, hundreds of people gathered beside the River Bure to watch 4 geese pull a clown along the water in a wooden washtub. It was meant to be remembered as one of Victorian Britain's most wonderfully eccentric spectacles. Instead, it became one of its greatest tragedies. I think this tragedy shows that when an architect or a designer design a particular structure, it's very important for them to be involved all the way through the building until the final opening, just to make sure that everything is done as they intended. I hope you appreciated the way this information was presented. I'll see you on the next one, and I'll say bye-bye for now.